Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is Monday, February 5th. It is officially Super Bowl week, so we are going to be kicking off the show with me giving my first thoughts on Super Bowl 58. Then we're going to be sticking with the NFL and talking about some NFL draft buzz. There was some news in the league that happened late last week within the Washington Commanders organization that could possibly help jumpstart them to move up in the draft to the number one pick. There's been some rumors about Caleb Williams where he wants to play, so we will be touching on that. Then in the second half of the show, we will be talking about the NBA as the trade deadline is approaching this week. So I will be giving my thoughts on which teams I think should make moves, whether teams should be buying or selling. And then we're going to finish off the show with a little baseball talk with the Boston Red Sox, my Boston Red Sox, and the way that they have sort of treated themselves this season and the drama that's been going on behind the scenes as their ownership group has been investing into other endeavors and sort of leaving Red Sox fans out to dry. So we're going to be covering all of that. But before we start the show, just a reminder to like and follow and to use the chat to make this show as interactive as possible, and use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker to help get your questions the priority they deserve. Without further ado, getting into our first topic here, which is the Super Bowl, and giving the first initial thoughts heading into this week. We're going to be talking about this Super Bowl, of course, a lot throughout the week, so I don't want to give any of my full-blown predictions just yet, but just want to sort of talk about some of the storylines and the things to watch heading into this week. Coming into today's show, the San Francisco 49ers are currently 1.5 point favorites on ESPN Bet. This has since moved because I believe when it initially came out, the 49ers were 2.5 point favorites, but it has then moved in the direction of the Chiefs. To be honest, I was surprised that the Chiefs were not favored in this game. It sort of makes sense, but just the way that these past couple weeks have played out, I don't think that the 49ers have looked particularly great through their first couple wins. I thought that they were outplayed by the Packers in the divisional round for the majority of the game before coming back to win that game. And then obviously the first half of the game in conference championship weekend against the Lions, it was a very brutal first half for them, but they were able to come back in that one as well. And you absolutely have to give them credit for the resiliency that they showed in both of those games, but I just don't think that they looked particularly great. Now, they of course have a loaded roster, and I think that the Chiefs still sort of have some unsolved questions going in on their end. Yes, their offense has looked tremendously better than what they did for a lot of the regular season, but I don't know if all of those questions have fully been answered. Now, in their first two playoff games, they looked much more Chiefs-like that we've seen during this Patrick Mahomes era, but they were also playing Miami Dolphins defense that had a lot of injuries, and then the same against the Buffalo Bills, where they were missing practically all of their linebackers, their number one cornerback. So they were sort of able to take advantage of the matchups that they were slated up against. And then last week, playing the number one scoring defense in the NFL in the Baltimore Ravens, they came out and they looked tremendous for their first two drives, scoring touchdowns on both of those drives. And obviously between the mind of Andy Reid and the talent of Patrick Mahomes, they are a very good on-script team. The question is once things sort of get muddied up a little bit, do they have those playmakers surrounding Patrick Mahomes to actually overcome some of the adversities that you face throughout the course of a game. And last week, specifically against the Ravens, we saw Travis Kelce coming up in huge moments for them on the regular, whether it be third downs or the drive right before the end of the first half, where he had a couple really big plays to help get them within field goal range. But as a whole with these Chiefs, I do think that it's fair to question their offense and whether or not they have the firepower outside of a Travis Kelce, who again has looked rejuvenated and he's looked great through these few playoff wins, but also, really fell off is not the right term to use here, but he was a lot more limited throughout the course of the year. Now he was dealing with some injuries. We've talked at length about his age now for his position and the injuries that he's dealing with. It's obviously not easy by any means, but it is something where and it's also just funny because we talk about the fact that the Chiefs, and even going back to their playoff run last year, the thought is, oh, it's so easy. You just have to stop Travis Kelce and you can stop the Chiefs offense. And yet Travis Kelce is always running open and he's always making big plays for them. So it's obviously not that simple to just take Travis Kelce out of the game. But both of these teams have, beat good opponents and have made their way to the Super Bowl. I guess it just sort of speaks to the way that the NFL was as a whole this year. Just the fact that both of these teams are flawed in some way, and there really wasn't just the absolute juggernaut of a squad. I guess, first thoughts is the 49ers were probably closest to it, but their front seven has not been quite as dominant as we were expecting. I love their linebacker duo between Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, but their front line with all these names, just sort of the lack of production when it comes to rushing the passer. Nick Bosa, we know how great he is. They bring in Chase Young, former number 2 overall pick, had an incredible rookie season, but he's been fine for them too. It's not that he's been bad, but he's a name that you would expect that they're getting more out of the group. It's Javon Hargrave, who they dished out a contract to, who again has been fine. And then it is Eric Armstead, who, he's been dealing with a little bit of injuries along with this process. But, just for those 4 names that I just gave, you would think that they would be getting more out of the pass rush and also the run stop game, especially with those 2 linebackers backing them up than they have been. But that has not been the case. The Packers ran all over them, and specifically in the first half, the Lions had a ton of success up front as well. They won that line of scrimmage. I think that the line of scrimmage is going to have a very big deal in this Super Bowl matchup as well, where both of these teams have been susceptible to the run. We've been talking about it with the Chiefs for weeks about how I think that they are vulnerable in the run game. Now, credit to them for stepping up late in that Bills game and being able to shut down James Cook. He only had 4 carries in the fourth quarter and really limited that attack as a whole. And then, again, it's just some of these conversations that came out about the coming after the Chiefs and the Ravens championship game was a lot of people got on the case of their offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, and their head coach, Jim Harbaugh, for not running the ball enough. And that's true. The lack of handoffs, I think it was 6 to their running backs as well as another 2 to their wide receiver, Zay Flowers. But they abandoned their run game, and that was sort of supposed to be the big key to this game, and it just never really came to fruition there. So instead, obviously they were trying to throw it, and with that secondary that the Chiefs have, it is incredible. So coming into this game, you would like to think that the 49ers are going to be able to run the ball on the Chiefs. I think that, especially early on, that should be their focus. We saw sort of, as good as Brock Purdy was down the stretch of that championship game against the Lions, we sort of saw that offense as a whole in the Niners get into their groove when it was Shanahan drawing up plays for primary playmakers. Deebo Samuel, who was very quiet in the first half, they were looking to get to him early in the second half, get him going, and along with Christian McCaffrey, who was a little bit quieter in the first half because as they obviously scored some points, got some stops on defense, they were allowed to sort of settle back into their game more. And then from there, it's not quite as simple as anything Brock Purdy can give them is a positive, but it is a little bit of a benefit that they have so much that you can get done with a Deebo and with a Christian McCaffrey, that then this comes to Brock Purdy, who once he does start making plays, this offense just takes off to another level. And I think that obviously Purdy becomes a very big conversation heading into the Super Bowl, where it was this exact matchup just a handful of years ago. I know that there's obviously been a lot of roster turnover within the past 4 years or so that it's been. They played in the 2019 Super Bowl. 2019 Super Bowl, I think, off the top of my head. But, a lot has changed specifically, though, at quarterback for the 49ers, where you're going from a Jimmy Garoppolo that you're throwing the ball 11, 13 times, whatever the number was, in the NFC Championship game, granted a blowout against the Packers, but then coming into the Super Bowl with a guy that Shanahan was never really on record of being a huge fan of, and it seems as if he has more faith in Brock Purdy as Brock Purdy becomes the lowest drafted quarterback to ever start in the Super Bowl. He was pick number 262 in the 2022 draft. Now, some of the names that have started in Super Bowls that have obviously reputable careers, obviously I'm going to mention Tom Brady, the 199th pick in his draft, and then it was Bart Starr, Hall of Famer for the Green Bay Packers, Super Bowl champion for the Green Bay Packers, picked at the 200th selection. So it's not like there has never been any success for a quarterback drafted so late, but I think that obviously the draft stature given when he was picked and just the prospect pedigree almost that we look at with a lot of these guys, people are going to be hesitant about Brock Purdy because of where he was drafted, because of the system that he plays in. And specifically with the system, I wouldn't say that it's an unfair critique saying that he has all this talent around him, but I do sort of take issue with the argument that a lot of people made, specifically when Purdy was in this MVP race during the season. Now, I would have never had him necessarily as the MVP candidate because I think that Christian McCaffrey is honestly the more valuable player in that offense. But I didn't like this whole argument, people saying run after catch yards and all that stuff where Purdy just has to make simple throws short, and he just happens to be in this offense where guys can take plays to the house. Every quarterback that has been in MVP consideration and some of these great quarterbacks has had weapons at one point or another. And really, when you break into the stats, it's not like it was an overwhelming amount in the favor of Brock Purdy gets so much more help than every other quarterback in history has. It was pretty average, the amount of support that he was getting as far as run after catch yards. So he becomes this very big story because of where he was selected in his draft, because he is really the key difference in the 49ers roster as a whole, and why people think that the 49ers can win this game when they lost in the past. On a show that I had last week, a 49ers fan was in the chat talking about how that is the difference maker, that it's not Garoppolo this time, and maybe that's a little bit unfair to Garoppolo, but I think that this offense, you've seen it all year long with their players going out of their way really to give Brock Purdy the props and to sort of try and let the nation know that they think that Purdy is the guy. Trent Williams, after his interview in the Packers game, I believe it was one of these two playoff games, he said that Purdy's our guy. He's been the guy. He's the reason we're here. And you've seen George Kittle after the Thursday night performance when he was interviewed after the game. He just bestowed so much faith on Brock Purdy, which I think should say something. Now, what are they going to badmouth their own guy? No, of course not. But I think that becomes obviously one of the big storylines of this Super Bowl. And, I think that as much as I think for the 49ers, if they're going to win this game, it has to start on the line of scrimmage with the run game. It is Brock Purdy that he's going to have to make some plays for them. The question is whether or not he will be able to make them against a very talented secondary with the Kansas City Chiefs. So we will be talking about the Super Bowl all week this week. So we are sure to be touching more on those subjects, more of the more nuances of the game. But for now, we are going to go a different direction. We're going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be touching on the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, as there's been a little bit of extra drama with some reports that have come out, a coaching hiring that was made by the Washington Commanders, who currently sit at number 2. So stick with us, and we will be more on that subject when we come back from the break.